Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Calvert alongside my very good buddy, Father Joe Grimaldi, and welcome to the Father Joe Grimaldi podcast, brought to us, supported by Houghton McInerney Star Lincoln, 12 Mile Road and Telegraph in Southfield. Check out that all-new MKC and the brand-new Nautilus. Nice ride. Tell everyone that you heard about Houghton McInerney Star Lincoln on the podcast, and you will get additional savings.
Special treatment.
It's called the Father Joe Star Treatment. I'm going into this one confused.
Why, Ken? Why?
Father Joe Grimaldi, Jesus was a Jew, correct?
Oh, yes.
There was a split at some point in our history, not our history, but going way back.
Way back.
Where somehow, some way, the Jews and the, I guess, Christians, did they exist then? No, they were brand new. How do I frame this question, Joe Grimaldi? The Jewish-Christian split.
Well, it's a difficult way to even talk about it, but anyway, we'll give it the best we can.
Okay.
First of all, we speak about Judaism. Judaism is such a very important part of Catholicism. Actually, for someone who attends Mass and someone who is very familiar with the Jewish rituals, they will see immediately the words that we use for consecration, the words that we use for the offertory, the various actions that we have during Mass have their roots in Judaism. Well, let's face it, Jesus was truly a Jew, and he never gave up being a Jew. And the other thing, too, very often we speak about, as Catholics, Abraham is our father in faith, and certainly he's one of the people that symbolizes the essence of Judaism is Abraham. And he is the father of faith because of the faith that he had in God and so on. So when we speak about Judaism, Judaism is certainly in the background of all Catholics. They are the ancestors, if you want, of Catholicism. And so this is why there is such a tie, and this is why there should be a love between Catholics and our ancestors who are the Jews.
I think there is, isn't there?
Love?
Yes.
Yes, I think so too. But as you say, very often, because they're so different, at least people think of them as being so different, people say, well, what do you mean by that? Huh? Well, you almost have to draw pictures. No, we don't.
Right.
We don't have to explain it so detailed, but there is a love. Actually, the Jews and Catholics share so many things in common. For example, the respect for life, the respect for family, the values of family, the values of life. They exist in Catholicism as well as in Judaism. So when we speak about the split, the word split is not a good word, I don't think. First of all, it was not really a split that occurred at any particular time. It is not an event. It's actually more of a process.
Right.
It's something that happened. It's almost a development.
It was an evolution of.
There was an evolution of
two different styles of thinking. How we're going to proceed.
Yeah, at least two nominally different, but by the same token, some theologians call them twins. Huh?
Oh.
They were twins at birth, Catholicism and Judaism. Because even Judaism, now let me go back a little bit.
Please do. I'll get out of the way.
Before Jesus Christ, you have Judaism being strong, but it was not the way we see it today. Huh? It was kind of, they had their own groups that were very different. So, for example, you speak of the Sadducees. You hear those words in the gospel a lot. You speak of the Pharisees. You speak of the Zealots. And you speak about the Essenes and so on and so forth. These were all different Jewish groups. So there wasn't one particular group that was named Judaism, because all of these groups were Jews, but by the same token, they took on different circumstances. And so they were different groups. And at that time, when Jesus came on the scene, there were so many different preachers at the time, lots of preachers. Jesus was just one of those preachers. And so that even there, we see that it's not so defined. You know, we like to see things in black and white and very defined.
Right.
Well, it was not so defined. Jesus himself was one of many, many charismatic leaders, people that attracted followers, and Jesus attracted his own followers. But what I'm trying to say is this: it's very difficult to trace when there was the separation, when the separation occurred. Very difficult. There's lots of interaction between Christianity and Judaism, even as long as 2 or 3 centuries. So it was interaction going on all the time. For example, followers of Jesus were Jews, and they practiced in the temples.
Sure.
Now, what determines them as different from the others was the eventually the practice of circumcision.
I read that, and I wanted to bring it up, but it still seems like an odd thing to have a spat over.
It was not a spat. It was probably the most important way of separating the two.
Why?
Well, because being circumcised meant that you were Jewish.
No kidding.
And so you had some of the apostles was saying, if you're going to be a good Christian, you have to be circumcised first, because you have to be part of the Jewish people. When Jesus came, he came to evangelize the Jews first, and then the others. And so some of the apostles said, hey, people should be circumcised, like Peter. He was a proponent of circumcision for Christians, for the Gentiles. So if a Gentile wanted to be a Christian, well, he would have to be circumcised first. Now, Paul comes along. Paul was a radical. Don't forget, he persecuted the followers of Jesus for a long time. But one of the things that made him outstanding was he saw Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, saying that the goodness of the individual lies in the heart. Interesting, recently we spoke about All Saints, and one of the things in the Beatitudes is we speak about the heart. What flows from the heart is what's evil or what's good. It has nothing, the action is the result of what's in the heart first. And so Paul said, hey, you don't have to be circumcised to be a Christian, a follower of Jesus, because it's the interior that counts, not the exterior. However, the Jewish people fought him very, very strongly on that particular practice, the practice of circumcision. Now, I know that today we kind of smile at it because...
it seems like a silly thing to get into a fight over.
Matter of fact, there's even doctors that disagree. Some doctors say, well, at birth, right shortly after birth, there should be a circumcision. Other doctors say, no, it's not. Well, even today, though, you know that somebody is a Jew very often, not with us here, but elsewhere, because they're circumcised. Because when you speak about the Arabs, they're not circumcised. They're the Gentiles. I was said, at the very beginning, I said something to the effect that the Judaism and Catholicism or Christianity were part of one complex religious family that were twins in the womb, that were twins at birth, if you want. At least from the Jewish perspective, Christianity emerged as a new religion after the destruction of the temple. But it didn't really fully develop until way after, because we speak about the destruction of the temple around the year 70. And the destruction of the temple took place because of the enmity between the Romans and the Jews. So it was the Romans that destroyed the temple. When we speak about the destruction of the temple, that is such a major event in Israel that is, even today, the Jews can never forget. Okay, it was a very important thing. The temple was the thing that made Israel what it was. And then for it to be destroyed, it destroyed everything that they knew about themselves. And so it was a very moving but also very important thing in the lives of the Jewish people. So basically, we speak about these Christians, and you say, well, who were the Christians? There's another thing, too. Who were the Christians?
Exactly. That's what
right.
you took the words right out of my mouth.
Well, they were the Jewish Christians to start with. You had the Hellenistic Christians. They were the Greeks, okay? And then you had the apocalyptic Christians, the ones that we might call evangelists today. You had then what we might call early Catholics. So the Christians were all of these together because it was not one defined group. See, all of us, we live in a time and in a world where we like to see everything neat and clean.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we can go to the roots of Christianity and see everything so clearly.
Yeah, well, to me it sounds like the twins became octuplets. You've just listed an entire different
Oh, at the time they existed that way.
Fragments of offshoots or whatever.
Of Christianity.
Yeah.
So, but essentially, the Jewish people who had this extra belief that Jesus was the Messiah, well, they considered them the Christians. The Jewish people who had this extra belief that Jesus was the Messiah. Because, see, even today, the Jewish people are waiting for the Messiah. The Messiah has not arrived.
Yeah.
However, if you speak to Catholics, they'll say the Messiah certainly has arrived.
Right.
And the Messiah is Jesus himself. In a different podcast, I think we might want to talk a little bit about the roots of Christianity that are in the Old or the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament. And there are many. It's innumerable roots in almost all, but in many of the Jewish books, you'll see references to the coming of the Savior that's going to be born in the line of David. You'll have all of these references to the coming of Jesus. And so it does exist, But interestingly enough, because of all of these mix-ups, I think one of the reasons is that you have different people denying the divinity of Jesus Christ. Then you have those that denied his humanity. Well, it wasn't until the 4th century till it was defined that Jesus was both God and man. And that's where they called Mary the Theotokos. The Greek word for Theo is God, Tokos, bearer. The bearer of God was Mary. And so that was defined not until about the 4th century. So we speak about Mary being the mother of God, the bearer of God. So Jesus is defined as being both human and divine. Well, people had a field day with that. Some people said, nope, he's not divine, because he was born of the virgin. Well, he was born of a woman. And then you have those, he's not human. He can't be human. If he's God, he can't be human. So he can't, you have all of these different, what we call heresies. Okay, so, but it was basically that Jesus was both God and man is what defines us as Christians, as Catholics, okay? So it's not just Catholics that believe in Jesus. Obviously, there are other religions that are Protestant that do believe.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Well, that they believe that he's both God and man. I mentioned something about Paul earlier. Paul is one of my favorites because Paul exemplifies true Christianity throughout his writings. If you look at the book of Romans, that's probably the most theological book in the New Testament written by Paul. And so he's the one that gives us what Jesus is all about, what he wants his followers to be, what the church is all about. And so when we read Paul, we certainly learn about who we are as Christians, as followers of Jesus Christ. But the thing is this, Paul was not always loved by the Jewish Christians.
Paul wasn't always loved by... I'm a little confused with that. Go ahead.
Well, Paul was not always loved by the Jewish Christians.
Okay.
Basically because he opposed the circumcision. Okay, so he was called the apostle to the Gentiles. The Gentiles were not Jews. So he certainly opposed the whole strict application of the Jewish customs, because he had, there were people that established rules for people that wanted to be converted to Christianity. And one of the rules was that they had to be circumcised. And Paul says, no, that's not the way it is, okay? Paul says we have to allow the converts an exemption from that.
So that was his falling out at that particular time.
Well, not a falling out. He never really fell out completely. Uh-huh. But the thing is this, that he was somewhat opposed by the Jewish Christians because, let's face it, that's for the Jewish people to say that it's not that important to have circumcision was a slap in the face to them, okay? To them, that's what made them Jews. That was their, even today, if you want, it means a lot. Uh-huh. It's, for example, the bris.
It's a bris.
Is their baptism, if you want. So it means a lot for them to be
firmly established, identified as a Jew.
Right.
Right.
So when Paul says, no, the exterior is not the important thing. It's the interior that makes somebody a good person or a bad person. The exterior doesn't have anything to do with it. He said you can be circumcised or not circumcised and still be a good Christian.
Wow.
And so people really were not happy with Paul at all. Not all, but the Jewish Christians. The Hellenistic Jews, the Greek Jews, they were certainly people that they thought, thank God, somebody recognizes the fact that we don't have to be circumcised because the Greeks were not. You look at the Greeks and they were certainly the Gentiles, if you want, so they wouldn't have to be circumcised. That wasn't easy for people to have to be circumcised even as adults, before they became, before they became good Christians.
I don't know the thing about it. Well, let me ask you this real quickly. It's a complicated story.
Well, I would like to go on a little bit.
No, please do.
Okay. So anyway, we speak about the 2nd century before Christ. The Jewish idea of the Messiah, if you want, had its roots in the apocalyptic literature promising a future anointed leader. So even in the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, you have the coming of this anointed leader who was going to come in the line of David. And that, of course, was Jesus. And there we're going to resurrect, if you want, the Israelite idea of the kingdom of God. Now, the problem is this, that the Jews were expecting a military leader. And this is why they rejected the idea of Jesus as the Messiah, because he did not come as he was going to free them from Rome, as it were. Mm-hmm. And that's not what Jesus was all about. Jesus' kingdom was a spiritual kingdom, and therefore they couldn't understand that at all. So Jesus' failure to establish this independent Israel and his death at the hands of the Romans caused a lot of the Jews to reject him as the Messiah. So those are the two events.
Oh.
Number one, here's this very charismatic leader, Jesus. My God, How could he die at the hands of the Romans? And also, why didn't he establish Israel as the strong, independent country? Well, we know that Israel was not established until 1946, I believe, but anyway. So, the first Jewish-Roman war and the destruction of the temple was the main event in the development of both early Christianity and what we call the rabbinic Judaism. In other words, the Judaism that we know today. Okay, so, and that was around the year 70, as I mentioned before, the destruction of the temple. After the destruction, well, a lot of those Jewish sects disappeared. For example, the Zealots, no more. The Sadducees, no more. The Essenes, no more. So what happens? All of a sudden, you have early Christians and the Pharisees, who later became Jews as we know them today. They start to develop. So now I'm going to use that word split, which I didn't want to use until now. But the split of the two groups, maybe because there were differing theological interpretations of the temples, of the destruction of the temple. So, for example, the rabbinic Jews, they saw the destruction of the temple as a punishment because the Jews were neglecting the law, the Torah law. They were not following the law exactly, and therefore maybe that's why the temple was destroyed. Meanwhile, the Christians said, well, the reason why the temple was destroyed was a punishment from God because they rejected Jesus. And so then you have this term that gets bandied about, true Israel. Well, that was offensive to some of the people because it referred to this church as a new covenant. So now to get back to the very beginning of your question, Ken. And again, I'm no expert at this, but I can say this much. I don't think we could point to any particular time or year as an event where the Jews became what we know them today and the Catholics became what we know them today. I think, as you mentioned, it was a development. And one of the things I like to think of is, yes, I do believe that they were twins at birth because there was this constant interaction between some of the Jewish customs, some of the followers of Jesus who are all Jews, and so on and so forth. So to say that there was a real split, well, that's hard to say. It's really more of a development.
You don't like the word split, and I understand it now better than I did at the very beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, but they are different. So
let me ask you one final question, very simple question.
Sure.
You and I have no issues whatsoever with the friendship that we have as Christians with our Jewish brothers and sisters.
Oh, I agree with you.
I mean, there's no issue in my life.
None.
And
I look at them as our ancestors.
Yeah, and I refuse to ever get into, and I'm not going to go there, any sort of anti-Semitic type of discussion about it, because we just saw the horrible situation that occurred in Pittsburgh, and what fuels these, whatever fuel was on board this human being, I don't get it, and I'm searching for answers as everyone else is, and I just wanted to say on behalf of the podcast, of course, thoughts and prayers going out to those that were buried this past week. 11 wonderful, beautiful people no longer with us.
I think one of the nice things that occurred just Tuesday of this week was that Jews and Christians gathered at Temple Bethel for prayer in the evening.
There's a beautiful picture I saw on the paper.
Did you? Okay. It included people from St. Hugo's and other churches as well. So it was great to see this unity among the people who, well, as I said earlier a number of times, Judaism is the Jewish people are our ancestors.
Yes, yes. So I thank you for that. Beautiful job. You amaze me. with your knowledge on so many different things. You're an amazing human being. And as we said the past podcast, let us always concentrate on what unites us rather than what divides us.
I really like that.
Now more than ever, ladies and gentlemen, that's a credo that we should all carry with us at all times.
Definitely.
I want to thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Coming up, I just thought of something. Coming up, I want to ask you about the holy days of obligation. That's one of the things that I have on my Post-it notes. So we'll talk about that. And it won't be long before we're going to start hearing Christmas music on the radio.
The C word.
As broadcasters, we hated it. Oh, no, here we go. You know, they usually pull that plug on November 1st. So right now people are driving around going, well, once I turn off the Father Joe podcast, I'm going to go listen to a little Christmas music as I start to get in the spirit. Thanks so much. We had a great time today.
Thank you.
All right.
Good to be with you.
Want to thank our proud supporter, Hoot McInerney Starlink and 12 Mile Road and Telegraph in Southfield. Stop on by, say hi. Tell them you heard about Hoot McInerney Starlink on the Father Joe podcast, and you will get additional savings. Check out that all-new MKC and the Nautilus. That Nautilus is a really, really nice ride. See you soon, folks.
I look forward to it. Thanks. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.
If you'd like, you can email us. It's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. Simply search Father Joe Grimaldi. And thanks for listening, everyone.